Hello, everyone. Tonight, we shall leave the clamor of the present behind to step into an ancient world. A place where the desert stretches under a silver moon, where the Nile flows silently past clay villages and temples, steeped in the scent of frankincense. It is a world where people lived more slowly, breathed more deeply, and listened to the dark with their entire souls. In this story, you don't need to try to follow every detail or remember every name, for this is a gentle journey meant for the mind to let go and the eyes to close naturally. Let your body lie down comfortably. Loosen your shoulders, relax your forehead, soften your jaw, and take a long, slow breath in, then slowly breathe out, as if letting all your weariness dissolve into the peaceful shadows of an ancient Egyptian night. If anything troubled you today, leave it behind outside the door of this room, for now there is only this voice, the night, and a long tale carrying you far, far away to an ancient night by the Nile. When you open your eyes in this story, the sky is turned a deep indigo, the color that appears only in the final moments before night fully claims the earth. A rare, cool breeze from the Nile weaves through the palm groves, rustles the reeds, and lightly brushes the brown mud walls of a small village not far from Thebes. The long, scorching day has ended. The earth still holds a faint warmth from the sun, but high above the moon has risen, round and bright, hanging silently like a silver platter of the gods. Under its light, the mud and straw roofs appear softer and less harsh, as if the night itself had draped them in a velvet shawl. You are a traveler, or perhaps a wandering storyteller, so far from home that sometimes you can no longer distinguish where your true home lies. You have trekked along the Nile for days, sleeping in palm-shaded courtyards, trading stories for barley bread, dried dates, and a few draughts of thin beer. You are not old, yet no longer young enough to rush headlong into the unknown. You have begun to understand that some nights are not meant for seeking treasure or prophecies, nor for breathless escapes from the dark. Some nights are simply for listening to the flow of water, the wind in the grass, and the hushed voices of people, ending their day, realizing that peace is often more precious than the gold in a pharaoh's tomb. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and water birds flew toward the marshes, an old boatman ferried you to the eastern bank. He spoke little, rowing with a rhythmic grace, his lean back arching under worn linen, while you sat still at the prow, watching the sunset dissolve into streaks of violet on the water. Occasionally he glanced at you as if to ask your destination, but then thought better of it. In this land, it is believed that those who wander between dusk and deep night have their own reasons, and it is best not to pry. As the boat touched the shore, he offered only a brief warning. Stay the night in Manet village behind the palms. A moon this bright often tricks travelers into thinking they have the strength to push on, only to leave them lost in the fields, shivering in the sudden desert cold. You thanked him, stepped onto the bank, and followed a small dirt path into the village. On either side lay fields freshly watered from the canals. The scent of damp earth rose sweet and deep, far different from the dry dust of the desert's edge. In the distance, cattle were led slowly to their pens, goats crowded through low gates, and barefoot children ran behind them, their laughter falling silent at the sight of a stranger. From a nearby house came the steady rhythm of grain being ground, the clink of pottery, and a mother calling her son to supper. It was a scene so humble a high official from the capital wouldn't spare it a glance, but to you, it was beautiful in a way only those who have traveled long and weary can truly feel. At the village entrance stood an old wild sycamore, its roots gnarled above the hard earth. Beneath it, a man sat on a low wooden stool mending a fishing net. He looked up, eyes squinting, then realized you were neither a guard, a tax collector, nor a thief. You bowed in greeting, asking if a stranger might find a place to rest. After a moment of appraisal, he nodded, offering a spot on his sister's flat roof, on the condition that you didn't snore loud enough to wake the children. The jest broke the tension, and you smiled, feeling the darkness finally accept you. His sister's house stood near the village edge, facing the river. The door was low, the walls thick. In the courtyard sat a small oven and water jars lined against the wall. The hostess, a widow of many years, asked little beyond your name and the last land you had crossed. In ancient Egypt, hospitality wasn't always as grand as the legends say, but in these poor villages along the Nile, people understood. Give a stranger rest today, for tomorrow your own son might need a doorstep in a far-off land. She gave you a bowl of lentil soup, a piece of warm flatbread, and honey-sweet dates. You ate slowly by the light of an oil lamp, listening to the fire crackle as your body finally softened after the day's journey. Night deepened. The children fell asleep first. The adults lingered, talking of the river's level, a passing group of masons, and a new priest at the southern temple. An old woman by the hearth remarked that a moon this bright was a good omen for those departing tomorrow, but ill for those with secrets, as the goddess's moon makes hidden things long to reveal themselves. No one argued. In this land, gods were as natural as wind or water. One didn't need to believe to live, was to see them everywhere. Later you climbed a wooden ladder to the roof. A mat of woven palm fiber and a hay-stuffed pillow awaited you. From up here the village was bathed in silver. The roofs huddled together like clay boxes. Beyond them lay the black silhouettes of palms, and further still, the river shimmered like a band of soft metal breathing in the dark. You lay down, listening to the sounds of the ancient night. A distant bark, the faint dip of a late oarsman's blade, the chirping of insects, the cry of a night bird from the reeds. The stars were thicker than you had ever seen, so close it felt as if a hand reached out long enough could touch them. But sleep did not come. Something in the air kept you alert. Not anxiety, but a subtle intuition, like a ripple appearing on still water before a stone is seen. From the roof you spotted a light moving slowly through the palms. It might have been a late traveler, but the flame didn't head for the village. It wound along a narrow path toward the ancient stone foundations of an abandoned temple of Hathor, which the hostess had briefly mentioned as a place with nothing left to say. A wise traveler knows that not every light in the night is meant to be followed. Yet, as the light stopped beneath a great palm, a breeze carried a scent that wasn't mud or smoke. It was the aroma of sacred resin used in temples. It was faint, but enough to make your skin prickle. Beneath the familiar village sounds, you heard something else. A tiny chime, like metal brushing against metal. If this were a few years ago, you might have climbed down immediately. But tonight, on the warm earth roof under the stars, you felt caught between two worlds. Peaceful sleep and a thread-thin mystery. You sat for a long time, not deciding, as if by waiting you could hear what the night wanted from you. Meanwhile, Mene village sank deeper into silence. Another breeze passed, cooler, carrying the sweet scent of night flowers. The moon climbed higher, shortening the shadows. A cat stepped lightly along a wall, its golden eyes catching yours before vanishing. From a nearby house, a baby stirred, humming in its sleep. Everything was so peaceful it was hard to believe anything unusual could exist just a few hundred paces away. Yet absolute peace often makes the smallest detail stand out, like a drop of ink on white linen. Finally, you stood up. Not out of bravery, but because you knew one thing. If you ignored that light, you wouldn't sleep. And a sleepless night of forced rest is more exhausting than a night walking under the moon. You climbed down the ladder slowly, crossed the courtyard, and slipped out the wooden gate. Outside, the Egyptian night welcomed you with its rare chill. The sand underfoot still held warmth, but the wind on your skin was like water. You followed the path, past the goat pens and sleeping houses, out to where the darkness opened up and the sound of the river grew louder. The light was further now, but still visible between the palms. You kept your distance, stepping carefully. In the distance, the old temple appeared, ruined walls and weathered pillars, a perfect place for secrets. As you drew closer, you saw the light bearer, a very young girl in a dark linen shawl. She carried a small wooden box pressed to her chest. She stopped before a vine-covered wall, slipped through a narrow fissure, and vanished. The sky remained still, yet your heart began to beat faster. Part of you said this was enough, but then the scent of incense wafted out, and with it something even stranger. A song. It wasn't a song with clear words, but a low rhythmic melody, thin as smoke. It floated between emotions like a lamp-lit boat on the river. You had never heard it, yet it felt ancient, as if a forgotten part of your soul recognized the sound of rituals from lost dynasties. Before you could talk yourself out of it, you stepped forward. Inside was a narrow, sloping passage. The air was cool, smelling of old stone and resin. You followed the flickering gold light until it opened into a small underground chamber. On the walls were faded carvings of lotuses and winged suns. In the center was a stone table with a small, weathered statue. The girl knelt, opened her box, and began to sing softly. You thought you should leave, but as she took a pale blue crescent moon amulet from the box, the light in the room changed. It was a gentle glow that made the air itself seem to remember how to shine. The girl looked up, her dark eyes calm but holding a hidden sadness. She began to speak to someone unseen, asking for the continued protection of her family's promise, for peace for the sick, and that dreams would not abandon her mother. You realize that true prayers don't always need grand temples. Sometimes they just need a small room, an old amulet, and a heart that still believes the night can hear. Perhaps the story should have ended there. But as she placed the amulet down, the statue tilted. A sound of stone sliding on stone echoed, and a fissure appeared in the dark wall behind the table. A cold, ancient air drifted out, the scent of dust, rotted wood, and dry papyrus. The girl stepped back, her hand trembling. You knew you had to speak now, or let her face the unknown alone. But you hesitated, knowing that once you spoke, this night would no longer be just another stop on your journey. It would be a bond, a turning point. The opening widened. From deep within, a pale moon-like light leaked out. The girl whispered to the goddess, then suddenly turned toward you. She sensed you. You stepped out of the shadows, hands raised in peace, whispering that you were just a traveler following the light. Strangely, she didn't scream. She looked at you, weighing your soul. She said her name was Nefru, and that this door had never opened in her lifetime. Nefru told you her family were the keepers of dreams. Every month they brought the amulet here to pray for the village's peace. You didn't laugh. In a land where myth is older than history, the line between story and truth is thin. Two strangers stood together, listening. From the darkness came no footsteps, only that steady pale light, like a forgotten dream waiting for someone to enter. You offered to go with her, and she nodded. And so, under the sleeping village by the Nile, a traveler and a keeper of prayers stepped through the stone into a place where no one from the world above had set foot for 1,000 years. Behind the fissure lay a low corridor. Its walls were smoother than the previous passage, as if once tended to with meticulous care. Underfoot, the raw earth had given way to cool, interlocking stone slabs. The faint light did not come from torches or lamps, but from mineral fragments embedded in the walls. They gathered the moonlight from somewhere far above and exhaled it as a shimmering glow, as delicate as a breath. You and Nefru walked slowly, so close that you could hear the soft brush of linen against linen. There was no wind here, yet the air felt far from stifling. It was still pure and carried the strange aura of a place that had waited a long time, yet remained patient. The corridor led into a circular chamber. The vaulted ceiling was higher than you expected, inlaid with stars of dark blue stone and dull gold. In the center of the room lay a small pool, as still as a mirror, its source unknown beneath the earth. Surrounding the pool were 7 low stone chairs, each with a curved headrest resembling the stone pillows Egyptians used for sleep. On the walls were paintings of figures lying in repose, eyes closed. Above them hovered small wings, thin clouds, lotuses folding their petals for the night, and the serene face of a goddess whose identity you dared not certain. Everything in that room did not evoke death like so many tombs. Instead, it suggested rest, the moment the soul falls silent to heal from the clamor of the days. Nefru whispered that this might be what her ancestors called the House of Sleep. Hearing that name, you instinctively drew a deep breath. Amidst an Egypt usually remembered for pyramids, mummies, and immortal kings, there existed a secret room dedicated solely to preserving the peaceful sleep of mankind. The thought was so tender it made your eyes sting slightly. You realized you were more tired than you had imagined from your long journey, not just in your feet or shoulders, but in the deeper parts of your being, the parts that had stayed vigilant too long, always guarded, always carrying the chill of broken nights. Nefru stepped toward the water's edge. The pool was so clear it seemed surreal, a smooth, dark disk reflecting the stone stars above. She knelt, touching her fingertip to the water. Ripples spread, and simultaneously the mosaics on the ceiling brightened. You heard a very faint sound like a satisfied sigh from a room long forgotten. Nefru turned to you, her eyes gleaming for the first time with a nearly childlike wonder. She said her grandmother once told her that, if the House of Sleep still existed, it would recognize the blood of the one who kept the vow. And tonight, perhaps, it had truly recognized her. You intended to ask many things, but then held back. A place like this did not suit urgency. You simply sat down in one of the 7 stone chairs. Curiously, the stone was not freezing, but pleasantly cool, like a floor in the shade. The curved headrest supported your neck in a way both strange and comforting. Above, the stone stars continued their dim glow. Beside you, the pool lay motionless. Nefru circled the room, her hand lightly brushing the carvings as if greeting ancestors she had never met. She stopped before a relief larger than the others, a woman placing her hand on the forehead of a sleeping child, with palm trees, a crescent moon, and the curve of the river in the background. She slowly read the hieroglyphs beneath, taking a moment to translate their general meaning, that this place was built to gather wayward sleeps and return them to those whose ability to rest had been lost to worry, pain, or memory. Those words echoed in the empty room like an ancient lullaby. You closed your eyes for a moment, letting it sink in, gathering wayward sleeps. Perhaps in every age, in every land, humans have lost sleep in the same ways, and have always longed for a place merciful enough to return that primal stillness to them. When you opened your eyes, you saw Nefru looking at the surface of the pool. Instead of reflecting the room, the water now showed images of the night sky outside, then rows of palms, and the roofs of Menet village, as if the pool held not just water, but fragments of peace from the world above. One house appeared more clearly than the rest. Inside, on a low bed, a woman slept fitfully, her brow furrowed as if carrying pain into her dreams. Nefru whispered that it was her mother. You did not ask what illness she had. Her expression was enough to tell you that some weariness needs no name to weigh down an entire family. Nefru took out the crescent amulet and placed it by the pool. Light flowed from it into the water like thin milk. The woman in the image began to breathe more evenly, her face relaxing slightly. You watched the scene without fear, feeling only a peace that was almost sorrowful, as if the world had been full of small miracles from the beginning. But people were too busy to notice. Perhaps this room could not cure a disease or change a fate, but it could give a weary mother one full night of sleep. Sometimes that alone is a gift greater than gold. You sat still, listening to the tiny sound of water, hearing your own breath slow down. The night above surely continued. The moon surely moved across the sky, but down here time was softer, as if stretched and lulled into slowness by the water of the pool. You thought of all the nights you had passed through. Nights on freezing sands, nights in foul-smelling stables, nights in cramped lodgings in Memphis, and nights beside travelers who would go their separate ways by morning. You realized no night had been like this one. Not because of the secret, but because for the first time, you did not feel like you were running through life. You were simply there, in a circular room beneath the earth, in an ancient Egyptian night, beside a quiet pool and a girl guarding the sleep of her village. Just that, and it was enough to make the entire world grow gentle. You do not know how long you sat there. Only that time in that circular room no longer seemed to flow in the familiar way. It was no longer measured in the rhythmic beats of footsteps under the sun, but had become a soft, silent current, much like the pool before you, where every ripple was minuscule, slow, and long enough for you to realize you were breathing deeper, lighter, as if the room itself were teaching you how to let go of the tensions you had carried for so long without even knowing. In that stillness, Nefru remained by the water, her hand resting gently near the edge, as the light from the crescent amulet spread out like a thin mist, not bright, but just enough to soften every contour around you, making the carvings, the stone slabs, and even your own face as you looked down into the water appear gentler, as if nothing here needed to be sharp or defined, but simply needed to exist in peace. After a while, you became aware of a very faint sound within the room, not from Nefru, nor from the pool, but from the walls themselves, like a sigh from far away and deep within, as if a place that had slept too long was softly stirring. Just as you were about to ask Nefru if she heard it, she turned, her eyes meeting yours in silence, and you understood that she felt it too. Yet there was no fear, only a gentle trust in her gaze, as if this were not a cause for alarm but a sign that the room was still alive, remembering its purpose and slowly waking in its own way. Nefru moved to one of the 7 stone chairs, touching the curved headrest, and spoke softly, recounting how her grandmother said each chair was for a different kind of sleep. Not sleep in the simplest sense, but states of mental rest. A sleep for those exhausted by labor, a sleep for those who had carried sorrow too long, a sleep for those held captive by memories of the past, and even deeper sleeps where one might briefly forget themselves only to return more gently upon waking. As she spoke, her voice held no mystery or effort to convince. It was like someone speaking of the wind or the water, things that are always there, whether we notice them or not. You listened, and instinctively felt your body grow, heavy against the stone chair. Not a heaviness of fatigue, but a pleasant sensation, like lying on a surface perfectly suited to you, where there is no need to adjust, no need to turn, no need even to wonder if you should sleep, but simply to let the body choose its most natural state of rest. Your breathing became steadier, slower, deeper. Each inhalation brought the cool sweetness of the chamber air, and each exhalation lightened the load you had carried from the world outside. Nefru knelt by the pool once more, her eyes closed, no longer singing but remaining in a profound silence, as if listening to something you could not hear. Then, very slowly, she lowered her hand into the water, not a light touch this time, but immersing her palm fully, and immediately, the pool vibrated differently. It was not circular ripples spreading out, but thin threads of light running along the surface, like strands of radiance being pulled from somewhere deep below. At that moment, a strange sensation entered your mind, not a clear image, but fragments of memories that did not belong to you, flickering and vanishing like seeing a stranger pass by on a road. You did not know who they were, but you knew they existed. You were not afraid, for the sensation was not invasive or forced. It passed through gently, like a breeze carrying the scent of another place. In that instant, you understood that this pool did not just reflect the outer world, but touched the deeper parts of a human being, the parts not always in consciousness, containing memories, emotions, and things yet unnamed. When Nefru opened her eyes, she looked at you as if to ask if you were all right, but no words were needed, for your face was enough to say that you were not just all right, but felt a peace you couldn't remember feeling for a very long time. She smiled faintly and said that perhaps the room was testing you, not in a dangerous way, but the way an ancient place checks if those who enter bring agitation. If you could sit still, breathe evenly, and not resist or try to understand too much, then you would be allowed to stay. You realized that this was not as difficult as you once thought, for in this space, letting go seemed like the most natural thing in the world. On the other side of the room, one of the reliefs began to glow more softly than the others. Its colors became clearer, as if an invisible layer of dust had been wiped away. Nefru stood and approached it, and you followed. There, carved into the wall, was the image of a traveler with a satchel, standing before a door that opened into the night, beneath the moon and stars. And inside that door was a circular room identical to the one you stood in, as if this story had happened before, long before you ever set foot here. Nefru touched the carving and turned to you, her eyes no longer just curious but holding a spark of recognition, as if you were not merely a random passerby. You felt it too, not as a grand destiny but as a thin, light bond, enough to make you understand that this night was no ordinary night in your journey. It was a stopping point you would remember for a long time, not for its strangeness but for the profound quiet it bestowed. Both of you returned to the pool, and this time the water reflected no village. It grew darker, deeper, opening into another space where nothing was clear, giving only the sensation of looking into a place very far and very still, where there is no voice, no movement, only total rest. You suddenly realized you no longer wanted to stand, or walk, or explore further. You only wanted to lie down, close your eyes, and let sleep come naturally, without force or waiting. Nefru seemed to understand. She moved to another stone chair and lay down lightly, as if she had been doing this forever. Without a word, she gave you a small nod, a tiny gesture that told you it was okay to do the same. You returned to your chair, adjusted your body, and rested your head on the curved support. The moment you fully relaxed, you felt every sound, every thought, every lingering tension dissolve slowly, like salt in water. The light in the room remained, gentle and steady. The pool stayed still, and the stars on the ceiling shone quietly, neither too close nor too far, enough for you to feel you were lying under another sky. A sky that did not belong to the world above, but to sleep itself. As you closed your eyes, the room, Nefru, and your journey faded away. There was only the sensation of drifting, like a boat without oars or direction, simply carried by the water, and from somewhere very far or perhaps very near, a shapeless, originless voice whispered, not in words but in feeling, that you had come to the right place for this night, that not every journey needs to continue immediately, that some nights exist only for you to rest, to forget what needs forgetting, to keep what needs keeping, so that when you wake, you will be a little lighter, enough to keep going, but no longer carrying what made you heavy. And then, very slowly, very naturally, as if there were no clear boundary between waking and sleep, you drifted into that slumber. No startle, no thought, simply entering it, the way a drop of water returns to the river. And the circular room beneath the earth, the house of sleep, quietly closed upon that night as it had for hundreds of years, keeping the sleep of those within whole, peaceful, and undisturbed by anything except the gentle light of a very distant morning, when everything would begin again, but in a much lighter way. You do not know the exact moment you truly fell asleep, for sleep did not arrive like a closing door, but like a warm tide rising very slowly, enveloping you, lifting you away from the last scattered thoughts remaining. And then, by the time you realized it, you were already in another state. Not quite a dream, yet not quite awake. A quiet middle ground where everything becomes weightless, slowed, and filled with a gentle clarity that the day rarely affords. In that space, you no longer felt your body as heavy or light. You no longer knew if you were lying on the stone chair or drifting upon the water. There was only the sensation of being held, as if an invisible current were keeping you in a perfect position where you needed to do nothing. No need to balance, no need to regulate your breath, for everything operated so smoothly and precisely that your intervention was no longer required. Then, slowly, images began to appear. Not the chaotic dreams you once experienced in noisy places, but scenes that were vivid and still, as if you were looking through crystal clear water. The first thing you saw was the Nile at dawn. No one around, no voices, no hurried movements. Only the flat surface of the water reflecting a sky transitioning from purple to pale blue. There, you were not merely a spectator, but a part of the landscape. You felt the coolness of the air, the softness of the light, and a peace spreading not just through the scenery but within yourself. The image drifted away very slowly, as if reluctant to leave too soon, replaced by another. A dirt path between two rows of palms where a light breeze made the leaves shiver. You walked along that path, yet with no specific purpose, no clear destination, simply walking. Each footstep was effortless, without fatigue or haste, as if the path itself were carrying you forward rather than you having to move yourself. You realized this was not a dream you controlled, but a journey where you were being led, very gently, very naturally. Somewhere you sensed the presence of the circular room, not with your eyes, but with a faint feeling, as if it were still there surrounding you, guarding this sleep from disturbance, keeping it from being pulled back toward unnecessary thoughts. You understood that this was what the ancients called protected sleep, a slumber uninterrupted by anxiety, uninvaded by heavy memories, held within a sanctuary where everything could pass through without leaving a trace. Then you found yourself standing in a small house. The soft golden glow of an oil lamp cast shadows upon the walls, and in the corner of the room, a woman lay sleeping. Her face was more peaceful than you remembered, the lines of tension gone, the heavy breathing stilled. You recognized her as the mother Nefru had seen in the pool, but in this dream, she was not just sleeping. She was truly resting, deeply and fully, as if all pain had been momentarily set aside. You felt a warmth spread through your chest, not yours alone, but as if you were sharing that relief with Nefru. Though she was not there, though you could not see her, yet the connection remained. Very light, very real. The images continued to shift, not abruptly or chaotically, but like overlapping waves, each bringing its own unique sense of peace. You gradually realized that this was not just your dream, but the place where sleeps were gathered, preserved, softened, and then returned to those who needed them. In that moment, you understood that you were not just a traveler who happened to stumble in, but a tiny part of something much larger, something that needed no name, no explanation, only to be experienced. Time passed, yet you did not perceive it in the usual way. There was no waiting, no clear ending, only a continuous flow of stillness. Then, very slowly, like a thin sliver of light creeping through your eyelids, you began to feel your body again. You felt the cool surface of the stone chair beneath your back, the rhythm of your breath growing clearer. When you opened your eyes, you were still in the circular room. The light remained soft, the pool remained still, but something had changed, not in the room, but within you. The fatigue from before was gone, along with the fragmented thoughts and the slight tension you had carried throughout your journey. In its place was a lightness, not of excitement or high energy, but a deep stability, as if everything had been quietly rearranged while you slept. You sat up very slowly without hurry, without needing to check the time, for you knew that whether it was night or nearing dawn outside, you had exactly what you needed for this moment. Nefru still lay on the stone chair beside you, her eyes closed, her face peaceful. You realized she, too, was within that sleep, perhaps deeper, perhaps more familiar. You did not wake her, for you understood that such sleeps should not be interrupted. Instead, you stood up and walked softly around the room, looking at every detail once more, not to memorize them, but to feel them, letting everything soak into you naturally. When you returned to the pool, The water had returned to its normal reflection, no longer showing deep visions, only the soft light and the shadow of the vaulted ceiling above. You leaned down and touched the water lightly, not to seek anything, but only to confirm that everything you had just experienced was real. The cool water touched your skin, light and clear, enough to let you know this was not a dream within a dream, but an experience you would carry with you, not as a vivid memory, but as a feeling, a small but lasting change in how you perceive the world. Behind you, you heard a slight movement. Nefru had awakened. She sat up slowly, looking around as if to ensure everything was still there. When her eyes met yours, she smiled. She did not need to ask what you had seen or experienced, for there are things that can be understood without being spoken. In that smile, you saw a sense of relief, as if the burden she carried had been lightened a little, not gone entirely, but enough for her to continue. Neither of you hurried to leave. No one said it was time to go back. You simply stood there for a while longer, in the silence, in the soft light, in the feeling that this night had given you both more than you had sought. When you finally turned toward the corridor, you knew you would leave this place, return to the road, and continue your journey. But you also knew that a part of this night would go with you, not as a heavy secret, but as a gentle stillness you could return to whenever you needed rest, simply by closing your eyes, breathing slowly, and remembering that somewhere, beneath the ancient earth, there is still a place quietly preserving peaceful sleep for those who know how to find it. You and Nefru left the circular room without haste, as if you both understood that such places should not be departed from in a rush. As you stepped through the narrow corridor, with its dim radiance from the embedded stones, you realized that each of your footsteps felt lighter than before. It was not the grogginess of one waking from a deep slumber, but the sensation of having been returned a piece of stillness that had long been lost. Even the air in the passage seemed different, no longer carrying the weight of ancient ages, but becoming more pleasant, as if the place itself had finally exhaled after a long silence. When the two of you returned to the small initial chamber, where the stone table and the statue stood as patient witnesses, Nefru's oil lamp still flickered. Yet the flame was smaller now, steadier, and you realized that much time must have passed outside, even though it felt like only a single prolonged moment. Looking up through the fissure that led back to the world, you saw the moonlight had shifted. It was no longer high above, but slanted toward the horizon, signaling that the night was drifting into the quietest hours before the dawn. Nefru carefully placed the crescent amulet back into its wooden box. This time she did not close the lid immediately. She paused for a second, as if listening to one last thing from the room before clicking it shut. Her movements were slow and deliberate, not out of anxiety, but like a familiar ritual. When she stood up, you saw in her eyes that the initial hesitation was gone, replaced by a deeper calm, as if this night had answered a question she had never dared to ask aloud. The two of you stepped out of the rock crevice, returning to the open expanse of the night. The moment you crossed over, you felt the distinct shift between two worlds. Not a shock, but a gentle transition, like stepping from a silent room into the wind. Sounds returned. The air carried more movement. You took a deep breath, feeling the scent of the earth, the grass, and the river water, all familiar yet somehow fresh, as if you were sensing them for the very first time. The light from Nefru's lamp was no longer necessary, for the moon was bright enough to guide the way. She blew out the flame, leaving only the soft darkness to surround you. It was not a darkness that caused worry, but a gentle shroud that made everything smoother, slower. As you walked through the palm groves, you heard more clearly the wind sifting through the leaves, the water lapping at the banks, and the silence in the spaces between those sounds, silence you had never noticed before. Neither of you spoke for a long time, not for lack of words, but because you both understood that some experiences do not need immediate expression. They need time to settle, to become a natural part of oneself. Only then, if necessary, can they be shared. In that silence, you felt a very light connection with Nefru. Not a grand or fated bond, but a quiet understanding, like two people who had journeyed through a place few others knew existed. That was enough to create a thread, thin but enduring. As you neared the village, the roofs appeared paler under the fading moon. Far off, a very thin line of light began to appear on the horizon. Not yet clear, but enough to know the night was ending. With it came a gentle feeling within you, not of regret, but of acceptance that every night has its conclusion, and it is that very end that makes them so precious. Nefru stopped at the village gate and turned to you. This time she spoke, her voice as light as before, but with an added warmth. She said that not everyone finds that place, and not everyone can stay long enough to feel it. Perhaps, she added, you were led there because you needed it. You did not argue or try to explain, for you knew she might be right, or perhaps not. But it didn't matter as much as the fact that you had experienced this night exactly as you needed to. You nodded and thanked her, simply, without fanfare. Yet the words held everything you wished to say. She smiled and turned back into the village, slowly vanishing among the houses, leaving you standing alone under a sky that was gradually brightening. You did not return immediately, but stood there for a moment longer, looking toward the Nile. The water no longer reflected the moon, but began to catch the first light of the new day. You realized you no longer felt the need to leave right away, no longer felt the urge to push on with your journey. There was only a profound serenity, as if staying a bit longer or moving on made little difference. What mattered was no longer where you were, but how you were present in that moment. Finally, you returned to the roof where you had slept before, climbing the old wooden ladder and lying down on the familiar mat. The sky was brighter now, yet still soft enough for you to close your eyes without being disturbed. As you relaxed your body, you realized that sleep was coming again, not as deep as before, nor as long, but a short, light sleep, like a final layer of rest before the new day began. You did not resist it, nor did you try to stay awake to ponder what had happened. You simply let yourself drift into it naturally, just as you had drifted into sleep in the circular room. In the final moment before you fully slept, you realized that the night that had passed was not just a story, not just a discovered secret, but a gentle reminder that amidst long journeys, busy days, and unceasing thoughts, there are always places, moments, where you can stop, breathe slowly, and allow yourself to rest. Truly rest, just as you had done under the sky of an ancient Egyptian night, where sleep was not the end of a day, but a gift preserved and quietly handed back to those who know how to find it. You drifted into sleep for the second time on that earthen roof, so gently that you did not perceive the boundary between closing your eyes and truly falling asleep. This time, sleep did not pull you down as before. It simply draped over you like a thin mist. Within that mist, you no longer dreamed in vivid images, but felt only a profound sense of security, as if your entire body and mind were placed into a state of balance you hadn't experienced in a very long time. There, no voices called, no memories intruded, and no lingering thoughts remained. There was only a soothing void where everything momentarily paused. Somewhere very far, or perhaps very near, you heard the waters of the Nile, not as a powerful rush or a heavy lapping against the shore, but as a steady, delicate rhythm, like the breath of a giant creature sleeping under the dawn. That sound did not wake you. Instead, it held you in a suspended state between sleeping and waking, like a small boat moored midstream, not drifting away, not being pulled back, just gently swaying with the pulse of the water. When you opened your eyes, daylight had arrived, yet it was not harsh or glaring. It was a soft, pale gold light spreading across the rooftops and falling into the courtyard, bringing just enough warmth to wake your body without startling you. You lay still for a while, not hurrying to sit up or recall everything, but simply letting the morning light and air soak into you, just as you had let sleep soak into you the night before. You took a deep breath, and for the first time in days, you felt your breath was whole, uninterrupted, unburdened by thought. As you slowly sat up, you realized everything around you remained the same. The earthen roof, the wooden ladder, the small courtyard with its water jars. Yet the way you looked at them had shifted slightly, as if you were peering through a clearer lens, where every detail was vivid but not heavy, not dragging you into unnecessary contemplation. Down in the courtyard, the hostess was already up, tending the fire. A thin trail of smoke rose into the quiet morning air. When she saw you, she gave only a slight nod. She did not ask how you slept or pry into your night. It was as if here, sleep was a private thing that required no retelling. You responded with a nod of your own, thanking her in silence, for you knew that not everyone needs to know what happened to understand that you had experienced a different kind of night. You climbed down from the roof, your feet touching the cool earth. As you walked toward the riverbank, you saw Nefru standing there, her back to you, watching the water flow. Her hair was tied back, her posture straight but not tense. When she turned, her eyes met yours, and you saw clearly the change in her, not a grand transformation, but a certain lightness, as if she had released a part of the burden she once carried. She did not ask if you remembered or what you had seen. She only said that her mother had slept more deeply than she had in days, and you nodded, unsurprised, for you had seen it in your dream. Or perhaps it wasn't a dream at all. Between the two of you, no further words were needed. There are things that, once experienced, require no explanation. The two of you stood there for a moment, watching the Nile flow slowly. You realized that this river, though always moving, carried a sense of stability, as if it had flowed for thousands of years without haste, without changing its essence. In that moment, you understood that your journey could be the same. It didn't need to be fast. It didn't need to seek too much. It only needed to continue, step by step, in its own way. Nefru said she would continue to go to that place on moonlit nights. Not because she wished to discover more, but because she understood that some places must be preserved through presence, by returning, by not forgetting. You looked at her, realizing she was not just keeping a ritual, but was part of something longer and deeper. You felt a quiet respect for her, and for all those before her who had kept that place in silence. You knew you would leave today, not because you wanted to depart immediately, but because your journey continues, and you do not belong to a single place. But this time the thought of leaving brought no sense of emptiness or regret. It was merely a natural next step, like water continuing to flow after passing through a quiet stretch of the river. As you turned your back to the Nile and walked through Menet village, you did not look back immediately. Not because you didn't want to remember, but because you knew that what needed to stay would remain within you, requiring no visual tether. As you left the village, the dirt path opened before you once more, stretching toward the horizon where the morning light was growing stronger, yet it did not make you hurry. You walked, step by step, feeling the earth beneath your feet, the light breeze on your skin, and a stillness that stayed with you. It was not lost when you left the circular room. It was not left behind in the earth. It had become a part of you, a part you could carry through long days, through other nights, through other places. And as you drifted further away, Menet village grew small behind you. The Nile continued to flow, the moon had vanished from the daytime sky, but somewhere deep within you knew that when night comes, when you close your eyes and loosen your breath, you can still return to that place. Not with your feet, but with your memory, with your senses, with sleep itself, where a circular room beneath the earth still quietly exists, still holds peaceful dreams, and still waits for those who need it. It does not call out, it does not seek. It is simply there, a part of the world that not everyone sees, but everyone can reach. If they know how to stop, take a slow breath, and allow themselves to rest. You continued to walk along the dirt path stretching before you. The morning light grew clearer but maintained the gentleness of the early hours. Though your feet moved with the practiced habit of a traveler, you realized that within yourself, the urge to reach a destination quickly had vanished. There was no longer a pressing need to seek or to prove anything. There was simply the act of walking, much like the way the Nile flows, without needing to know what lies ahead. The morning air carried the scent of damp earth and young grass, occasionally mingling with the faint fragrance of small wildflowers lining the way. You drew each breath slowly, as if every inhalation could preserve a part of the stillness you had just experienced. As you moved further from the village, the sounds of people faded, replaced by the wind, the birds, and the vast silence of the open land unfolding around you. You did not look back, yet in your mind, the image of the circular room remained, the motionless pool, the soft light emanating from the small amulet, and you realized that the memory did not fade as you departed. On the contrary, it became clearer and deeper, as if only by stepping away could you truly understand what you had received. The path led you to higher ground, where you could see the Nile curving in the distance, the light reflecting off the water like soft ribbons of radiance. You paused for a moment, not to rest from fatigue, but simply to stand still and observe, for there are moments where one needs to do nothing. Being present is enough. There you recognized something very simple yet easily forgotten, that most human weariness does not come from traveling too far, but from never truly stopping, never allowing oneself to rest without carrying worry along. The night before, in that chamber beneath the earth, you had achieved that. It was not through willpower, but through letting go, and that alone had changed how you perceived everything around you. You continued your walk as the path led you through fields and past low clusters of trees. Occasionally, you encountered farmers beginning their workday. They nodded in greeting, asking nothing, showing no curiosity, as if the presence of a traveler were a familiar part of this land. You responded with a gentle nod, neither lingering too long nor hurrying away. Everything moved with a natural rhythm that required no adjustment. As the sun rose a little higher, you found shade beneath a great tree, sat down, and closed your eyes for a few minutes. It was not to sleep, but simply to feel. The moment your eyes closed, you realized the stillness from the night before was still there, not as vivid as in the circular room, but enough to keep you from being swept away by thoughts. You smiled faintly, understanding that what you had found was not a place, but a state of being that you could carry with you. A light breeze drifted by, bringing the rustle of leaves, and in that moment, you could almost imagine you were still beneath the earth, under the star-studded vault beside the quiet pool. That sensation did not confuse you. It only made you realize that the boundary between the places you have passed and where you are now is not as distinct as you once believed. Time passed. You opened your eyes, stood up, and continued your journey. But this time, each step was no longer mere movement. It felt like part of a greater flow, where you didn't need to control or understand everything. You only needed to proceed with a quiet trust that things would unfold as they should. As the day drifted toward evening and the light began to soften, you realized you no longer felt anxious about the coming night. You no longer wondered where you would sleep, whom you would meet, or what you would face. You knew that wherever you were, if you could close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let go, you could always find again the stillness you had touched during that ancient Egyptian night. And perhaps, somewhere far behind, beneath the earth of Manat village, the circular room remains. The pool is still. The stone chairs wait, not for a specific person, but for anyone who arrives with a weariness deep enough to need true rest. You know that whether or not you return, that place exists as a reminder. Amidst this vast and moving world, there are always silences, places that do not need to be sought but only readied for, and they will open themselves gently, just as the night opened for you, and just as sleep comes when you no longer try to stay awake, but simply allow yourself to rest. As the daylight gradually receded behind the palm groves and the sun drifted low, you sensed a familiar feeling beginning to return. It was not the heavy fatigue of previous days, but a very natural softening of the body, as if you were falling into sync with the rhythm of the world around you. As the warm ambers of the afternoon shifted into the purples and deep indigos of twilight, you knew that a new night was arriving. But this time, You did not meet it with caution or anxiety, but with a gentle serenity, as if you had learned how to step into the darkness without carrying anything unnecessary. You found a place to rest near the riverbank, upon a level patch of ground sheltered by a few low trees. As you sat down, you did not hurry to prepare much, nor did you scramble to create a perfect space. You simply chose a spot that felt quiet and safe enough, letting the rest unfold on its own. For you had learned that sleep does not need to be built through control, but only invited through surrender. The night wind began to blow softly, carrying a coolness from the Nile. You lay down, looking up at the sky as the first stars slowly revealed themselves. They appeared leisurely without haste, as if each star had its own appointed time to shine. You watched them in silence, not counting, not thinking, simply allowing that tiny light to draw your attention away from whatever lay within, so that you could rest more naturally. The surrounding sounds were few, only the water lapping gently against the shore, the rhythmic pulse of insects beginning their steady chant, and the occasional breeze brushing past, just enough to rustle the dry leaves. All these sounds did not compete or disturb you. They merged into a very thin, very steady background, like a wordless melody that you didn't need to listen to, but only needed to allow to exist. You closed your eyes for a moment, then opened them, then closed them again, not trying to sleep, not forcing yourself to sink into it immediately, but letting your body decide when the time was right. In that interval, you realized that daily thoughts no longer appeared as clearly as before. They merely drifted by like distant clouds, not close enough to obscure the sky. You didn't need to push them away, nor did you need to hold on to them. The night deepened. The sky was now filled with stars, and the moonlight appeared, neither too bright nor too dim, just enough to cast a soft layer of radiance over the earth. As you looked through that light, you instinctively remembered the circular room beneath the ground. It wasn't a vivid memory, but a familiar sensation, as if a part of that night were still with you, not in the form of an image, but as a distinct, recognizable stillness that surfaces whenever you let go. You took a deep breath, held it for a moment, then exhaled slowly. You noticed that your breathing had changed. It was no longer shallow and rapid as it was when you were weary, but deeper and more even. It was as if your body had learned a new cadence, a rhythm not governed by what you must do, but simply responding to the peace surrounding you. You didn't know how long you had been lying there, only that the sensation of sleepiness began to arrive, not abruptly, not with a heavy pull, but like a very light repeating wave, each time drawing a little closer. You did not resist it, nor did you try to stay awake. You simply let it come, bit by bit, just as you had done in the circular room. As your eyelids grew heavy, you didn't think of tomorrow, or the journey, or what had happened. There was only the feeling of the body finally at rest. In the final moment before you slept, you heard the water, very clear, very close, as if the Nile were whispering something. It spoke not in words, but through its rhythm. You didn't need to understand or decode it, for you understood enough already that the night is not a time for worry, but a time to let go, to let the unnecessary drift away, and to let sleep arrive in its most natural way. And then, very gently, like a door that makes no sound as it closes, you drifted into sleep. No dreams, no being pulled away, simply resting sleep that was smooth, deep and whole under the sky of a quiet Egyptian night, where everything slowed down enough so that you needed to do nothing but be there. Breathe and allow yourself to rest. The morning light arrived very slowly, not in a hurry to dispel the night, but gently weaving through every space, as if dawn itself respected the slumber of those still resting under this vast sky. As you lay still by the riverbank, your eyes half closed, you sensed the change before you truly saw it. The air grew a touch warmer. The wind carried a different, fresher scent, and the first sounds of the new day began to emerge, very faint, very distant, like subtle signs that the world was waking up. You did not rush to open your eyes, but simply lay still for a moment longer to feel. Your body after a full night's sleep, a rare sensation you couldn't recall having for a long time. You realized there was no lingering heaviness, no persistent fatigue, but only a lightness spreading from within. as if every small part of your being had rested properly, long enough and deep enough. When you slowly opened your eyes, the sky had shifted to a pale blue. The stars had vanished, giving way to the soft light of morning. The surface of the Nile before you reflected that light like a silent mirror, without large ripples, only tiny movements sufficient to let you know the water continued its journey unceasingly, yet without haste. You sat up slowly, with no urge to bolt awake or prepare immediately for anything. You simply shifted your posture, feeling the earth beneath your hands and the warmth remaining from the night. As you took a deep breath, you clearly sensed the morning air, crisp and cool, carrying the scent of water, of earth, and something deeply familiar that required no name. In the distance, a few birds began to glide across the river, their wings cutting through the fresh light, creating gentle movements against the backdrop of the sky. You watched them for a while without thought or analysis, simply observing. You realized this morning demanded nothing of you immediately. It did not urge you on or pull you into a fast pace, but opened up slowly, allowing you to step into the new day in your own way. You stood up and lightly stretched your shoulders, not to prepare for a long trek, but simply to let your body feel movement after its rest. Every small motion occurred naturally, without force or hurry, as if you were moving according to a rhythm already present in the space around you. You took a few steps toward the water's edge, leaned down, and touched the Nile. The cool water brushed against your skin, light and clear, like a morning greeting. You left your hand there for a moment longer, not rushing to pull away, as if holding on to that moment just a bit more before the new day truly began. In that instant, you realized that last night was not something distant or finished. It remained here, in the way you breathed, in the way you looked, and in the stillness you carried with you. You understood that you didn't need to go back to that place to find that feeling again, for it had become a part of you, a very light part, yet enough to change the way you move forward. You stood tall again, looking toward the path ahead where the morning light stretched across the ground. You knew your journey continued, but this time you did not walk with haste or searching. You simply walked, step by step, carrying the peace of the night that had passed and the lightness of the morning that had just begun, where everything was simple, clear, and enough. The afternoon arrived without clamor, drifting quietly into the space as if the daylight itself knew when to soften. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, you noticed the change, not just in the colors of the sky, but in the rhythm of everything around you. The wind grew gentler, its breath lengthening, carrying the final warmth of the day. The sounds that were so crisp in the morning now gradually subsided, giving way to a deeper, smoother silence. You were walking along a narrow dirt path near the riverbank. The light was no longer striking directly but slanted down, stretching into golden-orange ribbons across the earth, the trees, and the water. As you looked toward the Nile, you saw that light reflecting into a shimmering path, extending and dissolving with each small ripple, as if the river were carrying the afternoon glow away slowly, with no hurry to hold it back. You paused for a moment, not out of weariness, but because this afternoon required no haste. It felt like a gentle transition between day and night, a place where you could stand still and observe without being swept away by anything. In that instant, you felt more clearly the warmth of the remaining light upon your skin. Not harsh, not glaring, but just enough to hold the sensation of the day before it fully closed. In the distance, a few villagers were returning from the fields. Their footsteps were slow, no longer hurried as they were in the morning, and their voices were lower, as if they too were gradually stepping into the evening's quiet. You watched them pass, neither joining nor detached, simply a part of the scene, a part of that slow-moving current. The sky shifted from gold to orange, then to pale crimson, and finally to violet. Each color appeared not abruptly but blended, melting into one another as if there were no clear boundaries between them. You tracked that transformation without needing to name it or hold on to it, for you knew that the beauty of the sunset lay in its very passing. You took a deep breath, and this time, the air carried a hint of lingering warmth mingled with the subtle coolness beginning to arrive, a transition so fine that if you weren't paying attention, you might miss it. But today, you did not miss it, for you were no longer in a rush, no longer pulled away by other thoughts. You were simply there, with the afternoon drifting by. As the sun touched the horizon, the light grew even softer, stretching your shadow across the ground. You looked at that silhouette, unfocused, unfixed, just another part of the landscape. In that moment, you realized you were much like this afternoon. You didn't need to maintain a rigid form, nor did you need to be clear or certain. You only needed to exist and flow with your own natural rhythm. The sun gradually vanished behind the horizon. The final light remained like a thin veil draped over everything, then dissipated, leaving a deep violet sky as the first stars began to emerge. You stood there a moment longer, not waiting for anything, but only to end the day in the gentlest way, not rushing into the night but letting the transition unfold naturally. When you finally walked on, the light had almost completely vanished. Yet within you, the warmth of the afternoon remained, a tender, nebulous feeling, but enough to make your footsteps lighter, slower, and ready to step into a new night, carrying nothing of what had passed but only the stillness you had learned to keep. The evening arrived slowly, not like the vibrant sunset that had just faded, but as a very gentle settling of the darkness, like a thin veil draped over the earth, the rooftops, and the river. As you stepped into the small village near your resting place, you did not feel like a stranger entering an unknown land. Instead, it felt as if you were stepping into a space that had been waiting for you, quiet, warm, and demanding nothing. Oil lamps began to be lit, one by one. Their glow was not piercing, but enough to create small, warm pools of light scattered within the homes. The scent of wood smoke drifted through the air, mingling with the smell of earth, timber, and food being prepared, creating a sensation that was deeply comforting and familiar. It caused you to instinctively relax your pace, no longer mindful of the distance, simply allowing yourself to drift with the rhythm of the evening. You were invited into a simple courtyard where a family was preparing their dinner. They did not ask too many questions or pry into your journey. They simply cleared a space, set an extra bowl, and beckoned you to sit. It was as if your presence were entirely natural, requiring no explanation. You sat down, feeling the cool earth beneath your feet, the light from the oil lamp dancing on your hands, and the stillness spreading all around. On a low wooden table, the food was laid out simply, a pot of lentils cooked soft, releasing a gentle steam, a few pieces of flat bread freshly baked and still holding their warmth, a handful of greens, and a few dates placed in a clay bowl. You looked at these offerings not with anticipation or hunger, but with a sense of composure, as if you already knew that this meal was not meant to merely fill you, but to be experienced. You took a piece of bread, tearing it slowly, not rushing to bring it to your mouth. As you ate, you realized the flavors were not complex or bold, but very clear and honest. With every chew, you felt that simplicity spread, not just through your palate, but through your entire being, as if your body were receiving not only nourishment, but the very quietude of this evening. The people around you spoke in hushed tones. No one raised their voice, no one laughed loudly. Their conversation did not linger, consisting only of gentle exchanges about the day's work, the weather, and simple things. You listened without needing to fully understand or participate, letting those sounds exist around you like a part of the dinner, like a part of the night. The oil lamp flickered as a light breeze brushed past, and the shadows of the family moved along the wall, unfocused and unfixed. You watched those shadows for a while, sensing their slow movement, as if time in this moment were flowing differently, not hurried or fragmented, but stretched out long enough for you to feel every detail without the need to rush. You took a sip of water, feeling the coolness travel down your throat. When you set the bowl down, you did not hurry to eat more. You just sat still for a moment, looking around at the light, the faces, and the surroundings. You realized that this meal was not just about eating. It was a space for everything to slow down, for people to be near one another, without the need for many words, where the mere presence of each person was enough to create a sense of wholeness. As the meal drew to a close, there was no obvious signal. No one stood up abruptly. There was no hurried clearing of the table. Instead, everyone simply ate more slowly, spoke less, and one by one, they stood, took their bowls, washed them, and placed them back, all occurring naturally, without arrangement or command. You remained there for a moment longer, not because you weren't finished, but because you did not want to end this moment too quickly. When you finally stood up, you felt your body a little warmer, not from the food, but from the peace you had just undergone. Outside, the sky had turned fully dark. The stars appeared more clearly now, and the air grew cooler, yet not cold, just enough to feel pleasant. As you stepped out of the courtyard, you did not feel as though you were leaving a place, but rather carrying a part of that evening with you, a part of the slowness, the warm light, the small sounds, and the feeling that nothing needs to be hurried. You walked through the night, neither fast nor slow, following the pace your body felt was right. When you found a place to rest, you did not need to think much, for you already knew that sleep would come, not because you tried, but because you had given yourself an evening quiet and slow, enough for it to appear naturally, just as everything else in this night had unfolded, gently, continuously, and without any forcing. You lay down that night, after a simple and warm dinner, and as your body gradually sank into its familiar rest, you realized that grand stories aren't always necessary to keep the mind still. Sometimes, it is the small, everyday, slow-moving tales that carry you further and more gently. As you closed your eyes, those stories began to emerge, not as vivid dreams, but as drifting currents of memory, appearing bit by bit, enough for you to feel yet requiring nothing to hold on to. You saw an old farmer living on the edge of the village. Every morning he rose very early, not because he had much to do, but because he was accustomed to starting the day while the world was still hushed. He walked to the fields without haste, not checking things with tension, but simply walking along the ridges, touching the soil, watching the water flow through the channels. Sometimes he just stood still for a moment, as if listening to something only he could understand. When he returned home, he carried no exhaustion, only a composure, as if his work were not a task to be finished, but a rhythm to be maintained from long ago. Then that image drifted away, and you saw a young woman sitting by a small window each afternoon, weaving cloth from fine linen threads. Her hands moved steadily, neither fast nor slow, and the light from outside made the fibers appear softer. She did not speak much, nor did she need anyone by her side, yet in that silence you sensed a wholeness, as if each line of the weave were not just labor, but a way to keep her mind steady, letting time pass without leaving a disturbance. You did not try to grasp these images, yet they continued to appear gently, as if the night were telling you of lives you had passed by without ever truly stopping to look. You saw a child running barefoot on the dirt path, carrying nothing, thinking nothing of tomorrow, running simply because they could, because of the cool wind, because of the light. Their laughter rang out and then faded, leaving no trace. Yet it was enough to make the surrounding space feel a little more alive. These stories had no climax, no clear ending. They simply surfaced and drifted away like light breezes. You realized that because they did not try to hold you, it became even easier for you to stay with them. Not swept up, not pulled away, but simply floating along in a very natural way. You saw a boatman on the river in the evening. He said nothing. He did not sing. He only rowed with steady strokes. The water reflected the moonlight, and each time the oar touched the surface, a small circle rippled out and vanished. You realized his life was much like those circles, not needing to be large, not needing to endure, only needing to exist fully in the moment and then fade without leaving regret. You no longer knew where these stories came from, whether they were your memories, someone else's, or just fragments brought by the night. But it no longer mattered, for you did not need to distinguish or understand. You only needed to let them pass. In doing so, your body grew heavier and heavier, not from fatigue, but from sinking deeper into sleep. Your breathing slowed, becoming more even, and the stories began to blur, not vanishing abruptly, but dissolving like mist, leaving behind a quiet void. In that void, there were no images, no sounds, only the sensation of rest, deep and whole. And in that stillness, you realized that life, no matter where, no matter in what era, always holds moments that are very simple, very light. Moments where people do not need to do much, do not need to become someone else, but only need to live, to breathe, and to let time pass naturally. It is these moments, however small, that keep everything in balance, keeping one from being swept too far away from oneself. Then gradually, even that sensation faded. No more thoughts, no more images, only a deep, quiet, and uninterrupted sleep. It was as if the night had completed its work and needed nothing more, only to keep you there, in total rest, long enough so that when you wake, you carry not just energy, but a lightness you can keep no matter where you go. In the tender silence of that night, as the stories of life drifted away like thin breezes, you realized that one thing remained, not fading like the other images, but emerging more clearly and slowly, as if the night itself wanted you to linger there a little longer. It was the image of the woman you love, appearing not abruptly, but as if she had always been somewhere in your mind, and only now did you truly see her with such clarity. You did not remember exactly when you first met her, not because you had forgotten, but because that memory was no longer a specific moment. It had become a familiar sensation, a part of who you are. When you thought of her, you didn't see a fixed image, but fragments that were very light and soft, like radiance, like laughter, like the way she stood still looking at something very simple that made the world seem to slow down. You remembered the way she spoke, not fast, not much, but every word was light and clear, as if she never needed to hurry to be heard. And when she was silent, that silence did not feel empty. It made you feel whole, as if nothing else were needed. You saw her in the afternoon light, where the sunbeams touched her hair, making everything around her appear softer. You realized that what you remembered was not every specific detail, but the feeling of being near her, a sensation so light and peaceful, much like lying under a quiet night sky, needing to do nothing, needing to say nothing, simply being there. On this night beneath the sky of an ancient land, her image brought no sadness, no sense of distance. It was simply a presence, a natural part of what you were feeling. You did not try to hold on to her, nor did you try to think further. You only let that image drift by, very slowly, very gently. You imagined her somewhere on an evening just like this. Perhaps she too was sitting by a small lamp, or standing under a star-filled sky, or simply resting after a long day. That thought did not make you feel apart. Instead, it gave you a very light connection, as if even if you were not in the same place, you could still share the same rhythm of stillness. You did not think of the future, or of meeting again, or of things yet to happen. In this moment, those were not necessary. All that existed was the feeling that you had once been near her, had once felt that peace, and that it remained here, not lost, not changed. Your breathing slowed even further, and her image began to blur, not vanishing, but merging into the collective quiet of the night, like a soft light dissolving into the darkness. You did not try to catch it, for you understood that the things that truly belong to you do not need to be held tightly. They will stay in the most natural way. In the final moment before you sank deeper into sleep, you felt only one very simple thing, that the affection you held for her was not something that made you heavy, not something that pulled you away from peace. On the contrary, it was a part of that very peace, a part that was light, warm, and enough to make your sleep deeper and smoother. And then, like everything else on this night, that thought also faded. It left no void, no sense of lack, only a tender sensation spreading out. You drifted into sleep, carrying that very light image of her, not as a memory to be kept, but as a breath, a part of the stillness, going with you into a deep and total rest. You lay there, in the quiet of the night, as all sounds receded and only the open sky remained above. When you opened your eyes, you saw the stars, countless, scattered across the expanse with no apparent order, yet creating a sense of natural harmony, as if they had been there for so long that change was no longer necessary. You did not count them, nor did you seek shapes or meanings. You simply looked, letting that tiny light touch your eyes. You realized that each star was so distant that its light had traveled through a vast stretch of time just to reach the spot where you lay. In that fleeting thought, everything became slower, wider, as if the worries of your day grew very small when placed beneath this canopy. You thought of others, in far-off places, perhaps looking up at this same sky. Though they did not know you and you did not know them, this moment was identical, very light, very still. You realize there are things that do not need words to connect, do not need meetings to be felt, but can be shared simply by coexisting under the same expanse. A light breeze brushed past. You felt it on your skin, not cold, not strong, just enough to remind you that you are here, in this body, in this night. You took a deep breath, looking at the stars once more, searching for nothing, simply allowing their light to exist within your vision. Then thoughts began to arrive, not clear ones, but faint ripples of perception, like questions that require no answers. You wondered how long those stars had been there, how many nights like this they had seen, how many people had lain beneath them, thinking their own thoughts, and then falling asleep, leaving the sky as it was, still, silent, and immense. You did not try to hold those thoughts. You did not pull them further. You let them appear and drift by like thin clouds that do not obscure the sky or distract you. You realize that looking up at the stars is not about finding answers, but about reminding yourself that you do not need to understand everything to feel at peace. Your eyelids grew heavier, yet you looked a moment longer. Not because you wanted to hold the moment, but because you had no reason to leave it. When a tiny shooting star streaked past, so fast that you would have missed it had you not been looking, you made no wish, thought no thought. You simply saw it and let it go. Your breathing slowed, becoming more even, and the sky above seemed to grow more distant, not because it changed, but because you were gradually withdrawing your attention. When you closed your eyes, the image of the stars remained for a moment, a faint layer of light behind your eyelids before dissolving. You no longer saw anything, no longer thought clearly. There was only the sensation of your body lying still, of the surrounding space holding you in silence. In the final moment before sleep, you realized this night did not need to be special or different. It only needed to be quiet enough for you to lie there, look at the sky, and let everything naturally pass, just as the stars remain there silently, needing to do nothing, yet enough to make you feel at peace. Then, in the deepening quiet of the night, Everything began to settle, not abruptly, but very slowly, like a ripple of water finally returning to a flat, mirror-like calm. You no longer perceived each thought or image clearly. They had dissolved, merging into the space around you, leaving a gentle void where nothing needed to be kept, nothing needed to be continued. Your body lay still, your breath even and deep. You were no longer conscious of trying to sleep or being asleep, for that boundary no longer mattered. The only thing remaining was the sensation of rest, true rest, uninterrupted by unfinished things, unpulled by worries, simply being there in total stillness. In the sky above, though you no longer saw it, remained. The stars continued to shine silently, the Nile continued to flow, the villages remained steeped in slumber. None of these things required your witness to exist. They simply continued, as the world always has, slowly, persistently, and peacefully in its own way. You no longer thought of the journey, of tomorrow, or of what had passed. In this moment, everything was enough, nothing lacking, nothing in excess. You realize there are times in life when the most important thing is not to go further, do more, or understand better, but simply to stop, let go, and allow yourself to rest. Your breath became so light that you almost ceased to notice it. In that weightlessness, you drifted deeper into sleep, not pulled, not pushed, simply entering, like a leaf falling onto the water's surface, making no sound, causing no disturbance, only merging. And there were no more stories, no more images, no more thoughts. Only a sleep that was quiet, deep, and whole, as if the night had embraced you, holding you in its silence, long enough and gently enough for everything within you to return to balance. And as that sleep continues, regardless of how long it lasts or when you shall wake, you are simply resting, completely, under an ancient sky where everything is slow, everything is light, and it is enough for you to do nothing more but sleep, deeply, quietly, and entirely.